So, what first drew you to Meg Crane's life? Like, how did you discover her, and how did you realize her story belonged on the stage?
Well, I'm a playwright, and so obviously, I kind of move through the world, asking questions, looking for stories that intrigue me in whatever way. And I had come across an article in the New York Times, as is mentioned in the play, and this was in summer of 2016. And the title of this article is was Can Women Be Trusted with Their Own Pregnancy Tests? And I have three kids, and of course I've used home pregnancy tests, as most women have of a certain age. And so of course I clicked on that article, and of course I read it, and of course I'm like, yeah, of course women can be trusted. And it turned out to be Meg's story. And that article was actually in response to an article that had come out a few years prior to that, that was part of this ongoing series called Who Made That? And the author of Who Made That, Pagan Kennedy, is a science writer. And she wrote this short article about the home pregnancy test, and Meg's name wasn't anywhere in it because her story wasn't known at the time. And so Meg had seen that article and talked to her family about it, and her family's like, "You should say something. You should email the writer. You should, say something." And so she did. And in the meantime, she had a bunch of prototypes that were in her closet, old prototypes from her time at Organon Pharmaceuticals, as well as the patent. And so those were auctioned off and the Smithsonian purchased them. And so now Meg's prototype, as well as the patent and all of this information, is now at the Smithsonian. And after that happened, Pagan Kennedy responded to Meg and said, "You're right. I can't believe we left you out of this, and I'm so sorry." And wrote the second article, which is the one that I read. And I love writing about science and the collisions between science and art. I was almost a scientist myself. I love the way uh, both scientists and artists look at the world. There's a
Mhm.
lot of similarities in the two fields. And so there was that aspect of it, the fact that Meg is an artist and also was able to look at this sort of scientific procedure and design a way for it to be accessible. So there was that aspect of it. And then, of course, as a female playwright, I am always looking for ways to elevate female characters, female protagonists, and then particularly women who've been forgotten to history. And so Meg's story kind of just hit all cylinders for me. And I could start to see it even just after reading this article. I started to see like how it could unfold as a play. And so I shared the article with my representative. His name is Brian, and he's a producer. And he and I have worked together for decades now. And he was as taken with Meg's story as I am. And so the two of us together were kind of like, he was like, "Do you want to work on this?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And so he found Meg, and her story had been optioned by a filmmaker, but not a theater person. And so she was very interested in the idea of a play. And so we met and got on a conference call together and started talking, and we hit it off like you wouldn't believe. Meg is a dear friend. And that is, to me, I think the biggest gift of this whole adventure is getting to know Meg and having Meg in my life and being able to watch audiences learn her story and thank her. And she deserves everything. And so, I did what I could in making a play to share. So that was how the whole thing got started.
Wow. And when you began writing the play, what was the moment or image that unlocked the play's voice for you?
It was a question, actually, which is and I'm not going to give anything away
Right.
because this is, I mean, people can just look up the story, but it's like, why did she sign the rights to her invention over to Organon? Why did she do that? And that, when once you sort of figure out what the question of the play is, then the story kind of um, wraps itself around that, if you will. And as a playwright, I love what theater can do for space and time. You can create all kinds of worlds on stage through language and imagination. And so, theater can do what we can't really do in film and television, or at least we can, but in different ways. But the theater can just kind of take you right there, and in so many different ways. And so when I figured out that question, why did she sign the rights away? Then the play about that moment, that decision, right? And so the play actually, it's about 2 hours, but the play actually takes place in about 3 seconds. And it's the 3 seconds that Meg takes to kind of think about the invention and how she got to this place before she actually signs that contract. So once I figured that out, then the idea of using things from the 60s to set the scene and being able to jump backwards and forwards in time, all of these things kind of became clear to me as the play structure unfolded. So that was the moment, right? That's the big question, of course. Why did it happen that way? Why did she do that? Why did she make that really important and pivotal decision? And I think the play tries to answer that.
Thank you. And what did you discover about Meg as you shaped her for the stage that surprised you the most?
um Meg's feminism, hardcore feminism, is in the is embodied with this sense of determination and quiet resilience and relentless positivity, right? It's so easy for women to be angry, and it's so easy for the situations that we find ourselves in to be rage inducing. And that acknowledging those feelings and understanding that, I think, is incredibly crucial. But that's not the only way to resist. Yeah. And in this
Mhm.
instance, Meg was put in really ridiculous situations in terms of what she was trying to do versus the pushback that she got from uh, the men who she was working with. And yet, as Meg continued on, she was just determined, right? She was determined to see this thing happen, and it was this selfless determination because she was never in it for herself. And I think there's this struggle in all of us when we do something important. Why are we doing this? Are we doing this for recognition, or are we doing this because it's an important thing to do? And Meg's answer to that question, I think, was so inspirational to me. And learning that making something good in the world and making something important for the world can sometimes be enough, right? um so I think Meg is just a joyful person. She is a, a wonderful role model and just a dear human, and being able to be that person in the face of incredible adversity was life changing for me.
And the play moves from shark comedy and game show into deep personal stakes. How did you find that balance?
I love surprising audiences. And I'm a structure nerd when it comes to plays. And as a writer, I like to push the envelope a lot when it comes to structure. And I love to put audiences on the edge of their seats to this and make them go to this place where they think they've figured out what's happening and then
Mhm.
surprise them. And so there's this wonderful um, discovery that can happen when you juxtapose moments of comedy and seriousness and drama in that one really highlights the other. Yeah. And
Mhm.
surprising an audience sometimes gets them to a place where they're thinking about something a little more intently than they would have if they were they were used to what's going on, if that makes sense. And there's also this sense when you look at the story, the, I didn't think I was writing a comedy, and I got I was very surprised when the play was started being shared with people, and they were describing it as this great comedy, and I was like, oh, okay, I guess it is pretty funny. What I learned is that the comedy comes from the ridiculousness of the situation that Meg
Yeah.
finds herself in, right? And particularly when you are looking on these past events through the lens of today, which is, of course, you can test yourself for pregnancy. You can go buy something at CVS right now. You pee on a stick, right? The fact that that mundane action that we're also used to now was so controversial, not 50 years ago is crazy to me and to a lot of women my age, and even women younger than I am, that why was this so controversial? And then the behavior of the men in this situation, who are not bad people, right? They are products of their time. And so the misogyny that Meg faces in the play is multiple, it's multifaceted. It's that you have well-meaning men who just couldn't imagine another way of doing things, and then you have the men who are just blatant jerks, and then everything in between, right? And
Right.
so a lot of the misogyny in the play just comes from the inability to imagine a world where things are different, and that lends itself to the ridiculous nature of what's going on. And so a lot of my work in the comic scenes was really just pushing that sense of the ridiculous just a little bit, right? And when you push it
Mhm.
just a little bit, then it's like, oh my God, that's so funny, right? But then you put that next to the absolute gravity of what's happening, which is that not only was this test necessary, but the idea that a woman can know what is happening with her own body, the fact that that was even remotely controversial. And it was like that really in the recent past
Right.
is crazy to think about, right? And how that is a health concern, how women have been left out of narratives across both science and medicine and history. And when you realize what that led to, it it then begins to throw a completely different light on the urgency of the situation. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
by taking one thing, which is just the ridiculousness of the time, and then putting it next to these issues that we are still struggling with today, all of a sudden
Mhm.
you're like, oh my gosh, yeah, okay, so maybe I'm laughing at what they did, 50, 60 years ago, but the fact is not much has changed.
No. That
Yeah.
kind of leads to my next question, kind of piggybacking on that. Why do you feel Predictor resonates so strongly in this moment, especially around autonomy and access?
Yeah, yeah. A friend of mine, a good friend of mine, who actually directed one of the first productions in the Rolling World premiere. Um, we were coming out of the pandemic, and we were beginning to talk about the Rolling World premiere in June of 2022. And after the headlines came out that Roe versus Wade was no longer, had been overturned, I started hearing from people in my life. And my good friend, Timothy, who was artistic director of Angels Theater in Nebraska, sent me a text. And the only thing the text said is, well, your play just got a hell of a lot more relevant.
Yeah.
And I was like, unfortunately, yeah. And he's like, not that it wasn't relevant before, but the idea that rights that were really had been taken for granted, rights that we had been assured time and time again by people in power would remain, were not there anymore. Like it just with the stroke of a pen, it was gone, right? And it became very clear that even something as simple as a pregnancy test, even something as simple as birth control could go away. And
Mm.
all of these things are connected to one idea, which is bodily autonomy, a bodily autonomy for women.
Thank you.
And yeah, and so because of that, because when you look at this historical story and you see how ridiculous it feels and how funny it is, and then you're reminded of, oh, wait, uh, these are still arguments that
Yes.
people in power are having today, it becomes very unsettling. And I think the standpoint of this play, I think that Meg is inspirational in so many ways, not only because of what she did, but also I think what she represents for women today, which is resilience, which is don't give up, which is keep calling out the 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 misogyny everywhere we see it. Keep telling people that it doesn't have to be this way, and keep doing the right thing, not only for ourselves, but for all women, which is essentially why she signed away the rights, is that that was the only way. She was told, she was lied to, but she was told that that was the only way that this test would be available for all women to use in a timely manner. And she, that's why she did it. It wasn't about her. It was about everyone. And I think just reminding ourselves that stories can have happy endings. They can be inspirational. We can make change if we just keep at it, I think is why this play resonates.
Thank you. And my last question, when audiences leave the theater after seeing Predictor, what do you hope stays with them?
You said it, hope. That's what I want. And what I love about the responses that we've gotten to the play, just across the board, and it really doesn't matter where it is, right? Is that audiences of all ages respond to it viscerally, right? Women who are older than I am are like, oh my God, I remember this. That's the way it was. That's the way it used to be. And frankly, we still see this sort of misogyny in the workplace, right? And it's
Yeah.
not used, and it's a real depiction. And then women who are younger than I am are like, no, it wasn't like that. And then they're having conversations with older women who are like, yeah, it was like that. So there's this sense, and live theater is so resonant because it's live, because it's right there. You can see a movie about life in the 60s, and it's, everything is really historically accurate, and you're like sort of going back in time thinking, oh yeah, that's the way it was. But when you see people in front of you who are embodied by living actors in the same space as you, it hits differently. And that's why I love theater, right? So being able to be in a space together with older women, younger women, men, older men, younger men, who are learning from each other in in the context of this story is so very powerful. And there's also this sense of sort of generational knowledge as well. And there have been a lot of mothers and daughters and grandmothers, which are sort of personified by the relationship that Meg has with the women in her life, and they all come and see the play, and it becomes this sort of intergenerational dialogue between or conversation between these women who are sharing their own stories, and that always comes across as sharing stories of when somebody used a pregnancy test, or in the case of my grandmother who didn't use a home pregnancy test because they weren't available, like how she found out she was pregnant.
Wow.
There are these moments that happen, especially in women's lives, but really in everybody's lives, where you learn something, you're pregnant or you're not pregnant, that really does change the course of your life. It's that one piece of information that just sends you on an entirely new path. And when you think back on those moments of your own life, you can get some perspective with other human beings in a room together. We are so isolated from one another, and this is what I think a lot of folks in power now are using to their advantage. And this is
Hmm.
why theater itself is an act of resistance. Yeah. So when we come together to
Amen.
hear, yeah, when we come together to hear stories together in a space, and we have to confront people who maybe have points of view that we don't agree with, right? But they're in the space with us, and we have to think about those characters, and then we have to think about the people in who are experiencing this play who might not agree with us, and yet we are all human beings trying to figure all of this out together, right? And this is what theater does best, is it brings all of us into a space where we can really think about who we are and what we want for ourselves and our lives. And so that's what I hope people leave Predictor with, not only having had a wonderful experience at the theater, but also thinking about their lives, the lives of women that they know and love, and then what they want for themselves in the future, and maybe how Meg can inspire them to be persistent and resilient in their own struggles.